Hi, welcome back to La Belle Vie. Today, in the Dan Markel case, we're going to go over the state's witness list, the defense's witness and exhibit list, and the state's amended exhibit list. I'm going to make this short and sweet, so let's get to it. Okay, so here is the state's witness list. Now, as I noted in my community tab when I posted this last night, I found the first five to be very interesting. So let's start with the first two, Donna and Harvey. Now, just like Wendy, I believe that Donna and Harvey are likely to be called under a state subpoena. I also believe that just like Wendy, Donna and Harvey would likely invoke the Fifth Amendment rights absent having the state subpoena. So you will recall that the state subpoena is crucial because it provides use and derivative use immunity for the testimony, including cross examination for anything that the witness provides during that examination. So we saw the defense list also list Donna, Harvey, and Wendy. Now, recall if the defense subpoenas a witness, it does not convey any immunity. Now, I'll cover this briefly when we get to Charlie's witness list. So, it'll be interesting to see what the state's strategy is with calling Donna and Harvey. We know with Wendy, they needed her to testify to certain things like the divorce, the relocation, changing the children's names. Um, so if they were to be tried in the future, Don and Harvey, I think that the state's going to need to be strategic in what they ask him. Now, again, of course, let me make a larger comment. This is all assuming they're called. Taking a step back, both the state's witness list and the defense's witness list are a notice. It doesn't mean that they're going to be called. So keep that in mind. But assuming they're called, I think they're going to have to, the state's going to have to be strategic. And let's also consider cross examination. So remember, if the state calls Don and Harvey under state subpoena, their cross examination would also be under that derivative and use immunity. So this is just my opinion. But I don't think we're going to see the same type of cross examination that we saw for Chris DeCoste when he had Wendy on the stand. And perhaps even here, the cross examination could be potentially positive for Charlie to counteract some negative testimony that the state might be able to elicit out of them on direct. But remember that cross-examination is limited to the scope of direct examination. So it's not like the defense on cross would be able to elicit just some, random other testimony that could be helpful for Charlie. If it didn't come up on direct, it wouldn't be subject to cross. So again, the state's going to have to be strategic if they call Don and Harvey as to what they question them on in testimony. And of course, at the very end of the day, just like any other witness, if someone does lie on the stand, regardless of whether they have regardless whether they have derivative and use immunity, they could always be prosecuted for perjury. But what is the likelihood of something like that? But in any event, just keep that in mind. Okay, next we have Rob Adelson. Now, this will be interesting. Perhaps they're going to call Rob to testify to the controlling nature of the family, at least with respect to Donna, and what type of control she had in his life when he was younger. Now, you recall that when he was in med school, or he might have been in his residency, he was dating a woman who turned out to be his wife ultimately. But allegedly, his parents did not approve. So he wound up breaking it off and he got married to, frankly, what I guess you could describe as, a nice Jewish girl. Now, that, of course, didn't work out. The marriage was annulled, and Rob wound up going back to his love, his wife, and they're happily married today and have children, and they're living out of state. So, they could elicit testimony as to that potential controlling nature and how the family dynamics of the Adelsons work. Maybe Rob knows about the family allegedly keeping large amounts of cash in safes. I don't know, maybe. Does he know if they staple money? um, I don't know. I mean, my understanding is they don't have a very close relationship now. So any testimony that Rob gives, I think, would be, more based on the past. Of course, we know Wendy. We've talked about her before. I expect the testimony from Wendy to be very similar to what we saw in the other two trials. And then we have Amy Adler. So, Amy Adler was Dan's girlfriend at the time of the murder. Now, recall she's a very successful and accomplished law professor in her own right. So, I was thinking about Amy, and I think, she can testify as to what was going on right around the time of the murder. I think she was dating him for about 6 or so months right prior to that point. She might be able to testify as to the relationship between Dan and Wendy at that time of the murder. Maybe it wasn't so hunky dory. Now, we had Jeffrey Lacasse, remember, testify and gave us some insight as to what Wendy was like in the months before the murder. So maybe, Amy can give us Dan's side. We haven't really heard much about Dan's life that much right up into the time he was murdered. So, any issues he might have, like I said, any issues he might have been having with Wendy. So that's what I was thinking on Amy. Now, if you look down, I don't know who Special Agent Justin Karsten. He's a FBI agent, and he did give a deposition. So I'm not really sure what he will talk about. Perhaps he was involved in the Miami bump. Then we've got Sigfredo Garcia. This is interesting. Yeah, I don't know if he will testify. We haven't seen yet an order of transport. I'll keep checking the docket. And of course, I'll let everybody know in my community tab if we see that. So I don't know. I mean, it'd be great for Sigfredo to testify, right? And come clean. I don't know. I mean, he's currently appealing. So that'll be interesting. We'll see where that goes and whether he's actually called. Okay, so on page 2, um, the next one I highlighted was Dr. Obed. Now, Dr. Obed was listed as a witness in the 22 trial, Katie's retrial, but he wasn't called. Now, if you recall that Dr. Obed lived with Charlie for some period of time prior to Dan's murder. Now, I don't know if he was living with Charlie on the day that actually Dan was murdered, so that July timeframe of 2014, but we do know that he was living with Charlie in March of 2014 because you recall that Jeffrey Lacasse testified that he met Dr. Obed as Charlie's roommate that evening after they had dinner at the Yardbird, and him and Wendy and Jeff went back to Charlie's house, and they were, hanging out in the hot tub and had all those inappropriate conversations about women. So, he was at least, Charlie's roommate at that time period. So, and he also, remember, knew Katie because Katie worked for him some period of time as well. Now, he could potentially testify how Charlie felt about Dan. Presumably, if they were friends, he might have spoken to Dr. Obed about, his frustrations with Dan, possibly. He might have known about that safe, right? He might have seen the safe in the house. He might have even seen Charlie stapling money. Who knows? He also probably knows a bit about the Adelson family generally and their dynamic. Now, Robert Swartz, I don't know he looks to be a pediatrician, so I'm not sure if he was a friend of Dan Markel. So if anyone knows who Robert Swartz is, if they could let me know in the comment section. Let's all work together and figure it out. Finally, I didn't highlight it, but June Mchinda, she's been called by both the state and the defense. I'll talk about her more when we go over the defense right about now and shortly. But I have some interesting thoughts about June. Okay, let's go ahead and switch now to Charlie's defense witness and exhibit list. Okay, here we go. Here's Charlie's witness and exhibit list. So I highlighted in pink individuals that are new, and yellow are individuals that are not new, but I want to talk about. So, first, Kristen Adamson. You'll recall that she was Wendy's attorney right up until spring of 2014 when she actually had to withdraw because one of the motions that Dan had filed that was pending at the time of his death was included allegations that Wendy allegedly failed to disclose financial assets in their marital settlement agreement. And so, because Kristen was part of that preparation of those exhibits, that would make her a witness to the motion. So she had to withdraw. Now, with Kristen, I'm trying to think how she would help Charlie. And the only thing I was thinking is that maybe they're gonna bring in Kristen to show that Wendy wasn't that upset about the relocation, and that once she lost, she had, kind of settled and in and accepted at that. I don't know. But I also was thinking that maybe she would be brought in to bolster Wendy's testimony before, and I'm sure she'll make it again, that, when questioned about these motions, that no one took it seriously. This motion that, the one that Wendy had allegedly hidden assets and failed to disclose assets in the marital settlement agreement, and also that motion that Dan had brought, making allegations that Donna was disparaging Dan in front of the children. And remember, the relief he was looking for was for Donna to have supervised visitation with the children. And so, again, those were pending at the time of the murder. And you recall in last trial, Wendy statement was, oh, no one was worried about that. No one took that seriously. So I don't know. Maybe Kristen will come in and say that they didn't take it seriously. I don't know. That's all I could think of. What do you guys think? Now, Donna, Harvey, and Wendy, really, they're kind of in the same bucket. And as I mentioned in the state portion, if the state's going to call these individuals, it's going to likely be under a state subpoena because presumably they're not going to testify willingly. They'll just claim the Fifth Amendment, right? And so the only way that the state would be able to get them to testify would be to provide them the subpoena with derivative and use immunity. Now, if the defense separately calls them to testify as their own direct witnesses, there's no immunity because the defense can't confer immunity. That's only something that the state can do. So if the defense calls them independently, this opens them up to cross-examination by the state. And so again, you'd think like Wendy, they would plead the fifth. And so we're going to have the same situation with Wendy. You know, I think that again, this is not legal advice, but I think Donna and Harvey's lawyers are probably going to move to quash any defense subpoena, just like we saw Wendy do. And honestly, if I were Donna and Harvey's attorneys, I probably would do the exact thing because obviously, you know, they've been brought into this. They're, alleged co-conspirators. Why would they willingly testify and not plead the fifth and with no immunity? Unless they're going to come to try to protect Charlie, I don't know. So we'll have to see. And again, Wendy would be in that same bucket of those considerations. I think Wendy's lawyer will again file the motion to quash, just like we saw in the other trials. Okay, the next witness that stood out to me was Gary Cohen. Now, if you recall, this is the attorney that had offered Wendy that great job in South Florida in connection with her motion to relocate, back when the divorce was still pending. I don't know how this helps Charlie unless maybe it's used to support Wendy's testimony that the reason everyone wanted her or she wanted to move to South Florida was to create some stable environment for her kids. And this is part of it, right? This great job. But again, I'm not really sure how that's directly related to Charlie unless it's part of, the further strategy of the defense, further part of the defense strategy. Um, Michael Mintz, I can't figure out who Michael Mintz is. If anyone knows who Michael Mintz is, I can't figure it out. Okay, June. So, as I mentioned, June has been called by both the state and the defense. Now, we saw her testimony and how that went in 2019 and the 2022 trials. And although she testified that she saw stapled money in stacks of 100s, she had to be reminded of her prior 2018 statements with investigators before she begrudgingly confirmed. And again, this is my opinion, but I'm afraid this time her performance is going to be very similar. Because remember, now we have her ex on trial in the courtroom looking at her, right? And even in that 2018 interview, she kept saying that everything was perfect until the case. And this was when she knew he had cheated on her and she still loved him. So, you know, and she also said in the 2018 interview that she didn't want to ruin his life. So I could be wrong, but I just don't see her sitting up at the stand and giving testimony that could, quote, ruin Charlie's life. I just don't see it being much different. Okay, so those are my initial thoughts on the states and the defense's witness list. Now, remember again, this is just a notice to each side. It doesn't mean that they're going to be called to testify at trial. Real quick on the state's amended exhibit list, there was really only one substantive addition, and that was calls to the undercover. That was the undercover agent in relation to the bump in Miami that occurred in 2016. If you remember that Charlie called the undercover on April 28th, and Donna called the undercover on May 6th. So that was the only addition. They also added some demos for the Mitsuri tape and the Dolce Vita tape, which I think that was just inadvertently left off the list when they filed it last Thursday. So let me know what you think. Do you really think that the state will bring Harvey and Donna to testify? I mean, I think that they will. I do think they will because I think, it will be under that state subpoena. So it'll be super interesting to see what they have to say. It'll be interesting to see what the cross examination is like because, and potentially the cross examination could be used to kind of counterbalance some negative testimony that the state might be able to elicit. So, anyway, let me know what you think. And thanks again for joining. Look out for my trial countdown number 4. I'm in the finishing stages of editing that, and that should be up this week. In the meantime, have a great one.